Hello, everyone. I'm Erik D'Souza, and welcome to a special edition of Crime Writers of Canada's podcast. It's special because today we'll be chatting with the 2024 Grand Master recipient, Maureen Jennings. It's always a pleasure talking to you, Maureen. How are you today?
I'm just recovering from getting an award, actually.
From the Grand Master recipient,
Yeah,
what I'm
that
gonna,
one. Yeah.
if you're watching this video, they sent me some pictures, and I will
Oh,
attach those pictures onto this presentation. I'll also have them on the Facebook site too, so people can see them there too. Because it looks like it was a fun night, and let's talk a little bit about the Grand Master Award. So, Crime Writers of Canada established the Grand Master Award in 2014 to recognize Canadian crime writer with a substantial body of work who has garnered national and international recognition. Maureen Jennings is let's say, best known for her Detective Murdoch books, which have been adapted into long-running television series, The Murdoch Mysteries. Some of you may know that she's also a playwright, and she's currently working on a project that I know very little about, and we'll talk about a little bit later because she called it Unusual Mobile Theater.
yes.
Um, I do know that she's working on a series, the PEI Charlotte Frayne. The fourth in this series, March Roars, is due out in September, and we're going to talk about that also. When it comes to alkalates, sometimes people say it better than I can, so I'm going to quote the London Free Press. Maureen Jennings is not only just the best crime novelist in Canada, she's among the best writers anywhere, a national and international treasure. So I couldn't say it better than that, and I wholly agree, and I'm so happy to say that she's been awarded the Grand Master Award for this year. So congratulations.
Thank you, Erik. Thank you.
If you don't mind, let's start with the books.
Okay.
So last year when we spoke, you were researching Toronto in 1937, specifically workhouses.
Right.
And I
Right.
see that work research paid off because I was on the pre-sales for Amazon. And I see that we are going to meet Miss Olivia Brody, an elderly resident of the Toronto House of Industry. So what can you tell us about Toronto in this piece of history?
Wow. It's a lot to say, of course. The House of Industry, I can't be absolutely dead on about when it was founded, but it was mid to late 1800s. And it was a workhouse in the old traditional sense, but it was also a charitable institution where people who were destitute could go and at least survive. Because, as we know, at that time there was no social security net whatsoever. Um, so this was, but it was always a bit mixed. And I know this from growing up in England that it was a feeling of shame for someone who said they had to go to the workhouse and be looked after. So, and it, as, there are awful stories about workhouses, which were probably all true. But in this case, I have seen no evidence that it was horrible in that usual sense of the word. It was an institution, which meant that it was fairly regimented, which means dinner hours and so on and so on. But no one was expected to work harder than they could. And generally speaking, because it had such a strong religious base, I think that life there was okay. They tried to make it as pleasant as possible for little special trips, the usual thing, Christmas presents. But I was relieved, frankly. I didn't want to find out that there was this horrible, horrible place sitting in not far from here. Anyway, so by 36, 37, it was definitely almost entirely elderly people who just didn't have any other support. So it was okay. At least they got decent food, a lodging, and some entertainments. So I was really glad to get into that. And in my story, Olivia, who it's weird to say when it comes out of your own brain that you love the character, but you do, well, that sounds very self-involved. But I really enjoyed that Olivia came to visit me. And in the story, she is a resident there, and she sees hears about, and this is also a true, this part's true, that at the time I read in the newspaper of that exact time that there were two young boys who were accused of theft, and the punishment, because they were young, was eight strap. I don't know what they call them. 8 strokes of the strap, which sounded pretty fierce to me, but that was what it was. So in my story, Olivia witnesses something and she says, those boys are innocent. We cannot have a miscarriage of justice. She hires Charlotte, who is a private investigator, to suss out what Olivia thinks were the real culprits. So that took me into some really, really interesting places in the city, which I could go on and on and on about, but hopefully you'll read the story and see what they are.
In the meantime, I was on your website and I saw a relatively new feature that you have. Welcome to the world of private investigator Charlotte Frayne, a photo tour of Toronto during the 1930s. Uh, I know you're a big history buff. I'm not as big a history buff as you, but I still very much enjoyed those photos. And it's interesting to see the Toronto from 85 years ago or so.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's such an issue right now, of course, perhaps where you are too, but not a lot of that is left. And it's a bit of a hot spot for me. I don't know how we deal with it. How can we keep things and at the same time allow new things to grow and develop? Really a difficult topic. But the House of Industry, thank goodness, they kept the facade. So even though it's now a central Y for women, you can really feel what that must have been like. Big building, 3 stories, gray brick. You can still feel it, and I'm glad about that. I'm glad some wonderful person said, "No, we can't just knock it all down. We're going to have facades," and there are 2 or 3 of those around, which I'm glad about actually.
Yeah, I'm sure it's an odd issue for Canada to be suffering from since we're such a new country compared to like England. And I've been on walking tours in England where you're like walking down the streets of Charles Dickinson
Yeah, yeah,
walked
yeah,
out,
yeah,
and
yeah,
it's still there, and the things in the ground are still there.
yeah,
But Canada
yeah,
seems to rebuild itself every few years or every
yeah.
generation or two. The same thing's happening in Vancouver.
Oh, really? Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Well, let's talk about the character then. So there's a small
Okay.
jump in November rain to March roars. Um, so what can you tell us a little bit of Charlotte and what she's up to in those few months?
Um, Sorry, actually, Eric, the last book is Cold Snap, which is just, I got into weather, right? So
Oh, sorry, yes.
November rain is
Number
November,
two. Yeah.
and Cold Snap is December. And I wanted to move on a little bit, but not too far. So March Rose is literally March, so that's only 3 months later. So, and again, that's always a writer's dilemma. What do you do and say about your character when they're off stage, you know? Well, I don't know what she's been doing. She didn't tell me. If just a few things. Her relationship is developed, which is fun, and she's got done some cases. And then this happens with Olivia in March, and of course, by March, the world is already rapidly changing. So I can bring that into the story.
Mhm.
Even from 36, a few months later, as Churchill said, the storm clouds were gathering over Europe. So that's a very important part of the story, what was happening out there.
Yeah, and you tell us how it's happening here too. And I'm sorry, I forget which novel it is, but we meet like a young Nazi party. Uh, there is Europe's problems are coming to Canada, right?
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's another thing. And I really do like talking about this because I feel fortunate that when I'm researching, I call it casting a wide net, and I find out things that I didn't have a clue about. Like I didn't know that, for example, we're talking 1936, pre-Nazi was, sorry, Hitler was in power by then as chancellor, but there was swastika clubs in Toronto.
Mhm.
I didn't know that. So that was very important. And that sort of culminated, which I also use in the big blot on Toronto's history, the Christie Pitts riot, which was in 1933. And it's just over here. I live very close to it. So I can try to get again a feeling of what that was like. Um, and as I said, I was completely astonished. Why didn't I know that? So you go around and you say to people, "Did you know about this?" No. And I think, "Oh my gosh, I have to." It's such an important thing that happened, and I don't know about you, but I really believe we've got to know history. We really got to understand it. Otherwise, we will repeat the same mistakes if we don't, and we can see them coming, the storm clouds, and say, wait a minute, we've got to stop this right now. So that's been very important for me, and I'm very grateful that I've been able to find these things and put them into a book where hopefully someone will say, gosh, I didn't know that, and let's not do that ever again, stuff like that. So
Um, yeah, it could definitely make you worry. I was wondering, I don't know how far you're planning on writing this series, but eventually we're going to have to get to September 1939. Uh, are you thinking that perhaps you'll tell about Canada in the war? And I know you've done it before in Bomb Girls, but this would be through Charlotte's perspective.
at the moment, I'm not. And if I may say, I've gone on a slightly different path, which I'm actually really enjoying. And my publisher, bless his heart, has sort of said, "Oh, okay," because what I decided to do, it's a bit like if you've been a marathon runner and you get a bit older and marathons are hard. So I couldn't face writing another novel, it's hard work, frankly. Take, so what I'm doing in the next book, which is called The Chimes at Midnight, I've got brought together all of my characters except Tom Tyler, who's not here, all of my Toronto characters, and stealing from the Canterbury Tales, they kind of get stuck in the cafe. And so to while away the time, the Wolf says to them, "Well, let's each of us tell a story. And you can go wherever you like, but you've got to tell a true story. And at the end, we'll vote for the best story, which is a piece of pie or something like that." So that's been really fun because it's easier to handle, and I can go back into Toronto history again, which I like to do, and give it into the mouth of one of my characters. So, just for example, the Christie Pitts riot, which I didn't go into a lot of detail in my novel, I just mentioned that it was there. And in this story, it's a big factor, and I give it to Mr. Gilmore, who is Jewish. Um, and that was a racist thing, that whole riot, anti Semitic. So that's been really fun. So I've done four, and I have five more to go. And because of the time frame, I was able to bring back Detective William Murdoch. He's a little bit older, but he's still with it. And so he'll tell what I hope will be a longer story again about probably about himself being a young constable, which I thought could be. So that's been much easier to do, and I'm really enjoying that. That's called The Chimes at Midnight from, of course, the Henry play, which to me is one, I don't know, some phrase, Shakespeare, he was good with words, right? But some of the Shakespearean phrases just jump out and go, wow. And that's when Falstaff is talking to his buddy, and he said, "We have heard the chimes at midnight." I'm still not sure why that just goes, wow, what a line, but that's what the book's called. So,
Wow, I cannot wait. I'm sure everybody
thank
listening
you.
cannot wait either.
Oh, I hope not. Thank you. It's been
Um,
really fun.
well, let's talk about another creative endeavor of yours. I don't know anything about it, so you're going to have to tell me about this play that's coming up this summer.
Oh, I'd love to tell you about the play that's coming out. Oh my gosh. Okay. I wrote a play a long time ago, actually, and it's never been produced. I just had it a read through a couple of times, and I've sort of tinkered with it for years. Um, anyway, I was quite pleased with it. Now, last summer, I guess, Ayn and I were in Picton County, Prince Edward County, and we were literally waiting to go and see a play in which my good buddy Graham Abbey, I have to give him a little nudge here, brilliant actor. Oh my gosh. And he was in this one man play, and we were waiting outside in a little, it was actually like a patio. So we're sitting down, waiting to go in. And there are those two fellows there. We started to chat. I don't even know how it ended up like that, but we chatted. And it turns out that they, some time ago, started what they call the theatre roulant, moving a mobile theatre, which is the concept is very old. It's medieval, really, where they would move the cart around and they perform the mystery plays. And I love the idea. And they have this huge old farm wagon, I guess, which they have converted into a theater. And they literally would move it from space to space, typically drawn by horses. And then they can pull out the theater and do a little play. So it's outdoor, it goes to the country. And I just loved the idea. I felt like I was Shakespeare all over again. Anyway, I said, "Oh gosh, I just happen to have written a play that only involves three characters," which was rather important. And so they said, "Okay, let's have a look." Anyway, absolute click, mutual love immediately. And so they are going to, as well as their own plays, there are two starting in July, they are going to perform my play in August on this wagon. Now, the wagon, they have got an arrangement with the Waring House in Picton that the wagon will be stationary. I mean, they don't have to go to another place, and it'll still probably be outdoors. They put the chairs out front, and I think they have just now cast it, and that will be the beginning of August. And I'm so excited. I've had plays produced before, and it's always incredibly exciting. When I write a script for TV, that's exciting too, but it's not the same at all. First of all, it's usually been, I was going to say messed with. I didn't say messed with. It has been adapted, whatever. And I don't have any audience reaction, obviously, and it's not live. But the theater is like nothing else. If I could ever have made a living writing plays, I think I would have done that. But so anyway, so this play will be on this little moving wagon, and I hope it goes over well. I am beyond thrilled about that.
Every
And that,
once in a while, I regret moving to the other side of the country because of things like that. Does that sound so fun? Another thing that's coming up, and we've talked about it a little bit before last year, is Motive is coming up, and
yes,
so you have a big night coming up too. So let's talk about the night and
motive is strictly crime writers. Like last year, for example, they had Anthony Horowitz, who was
yes,
like God, and James Comey, who is God's brother. So it was like
they
both
got
of
Walter
you.
Mosley this year.
I know Walter Mosley. I'm so happy that I think it's doing quite well. And Roland Gulliver, who's now the director, it was a bit of a bold step, to say we're not mingling, we're separate. People love crime fiction. Why don't we just do a whole thing for
Uh,
them? And that's in June. So what I am doing, which I'm very happy to do, I'm doing two things actually. Um, I've done this before, talking about Murdoch, how Murdoch Mysteries happened, and then I'll show an episode that's already been shown, but I'll show an episode and talk about it in a sort of gossipy way, which I think behind the scenes. I look, but that was fun when I did that before. So we're hoping that will be interesting. And then the next morning, I'm on a panel with Roberta Rich, whom I personally don't know yet, but I'm hoping to get to know. She writes historical crime fiction as well. So I presume we'll have a lot in common.
I was amazed at, again, how many Canadians. I know it's a Toronto festival, but when we say Canadians, like it's names like Ashley O'Drain, Catherine McKenzie, Jonathan Whitelaw, Linwood Barkley. I actually wrote a really long list. These are all Canadians that are doing very well on an international stage now,
Yes,
along with like Kelly Armstrong, Ian Hamilton, Rosnay, Rick Mafina. I keep going. So, what
I
do you
know. Yeah,
think is like? Is there a Canadian noir? I'm hoping. I'm kind of my job description to to promote Canadian noir. But do you see it?
I think so. It reminds me of way back when I was growing up, I suppose, where it was very British, because I grew up in Britain, it was very British. And then
Hmm.
gradually, at that time, the infiltrators were noir, the Scandinavian noir. And it was like, wow. So I was very happy that for a long time, Canadian crime writer was just a bit in the shadows. But now it's coming to its fore, and I'm really happy to see that. Like everywhere, I think everywhere is doing it. I think Australia's done that, and the States has always been strong. We always have to feel felt overshadowed by the States. But no, I think that's really great, actually. And it's easier to cross those international lines now than it used to be, where it was very closed circles, really. So no, I think that's terrific.
Yeah, I think we're in it's an interesting transition because the entire industry has to change. The entire literature industry is changing, but it's so accessible now, and it's so great to read both Canadians and so many great international crime writers and see their perspective of
Yes,
what they bring to the table.
yes, yeah, absolutely.
Well, I think that's all the questions I had for you. Am I missing anything? Is there anything coming up that you'd want to talk about?
No, I just hope people come to Motive because I think it would be really fun. No, it's really well, I think this is the third year, isn't it? Or the fourth year. I think it might be just the third year actually. And
Oh,
I was so thrilled when it's happened because as I said, we've always been a bit marginalized, the typical thing. And a friend said to me once, why don't you write a real novel? And then she dropped dead from my thought, of course. Jim! But I think that feeling is gone, pretty much gone. So, but it was definitely there. And so now to say, okay, this what you can expect in September is a more literary bent, but these are some very successful writers who work only in the crime genre. So maybe at some point Roland will do a sci-fi or a romantic. I'm not sure. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but at least this for now is motive is the crime writer genre, and I hope it'll be really fun.
I've heard um, the Bonnie Blight's coming back too, so it's good to see
Yes,
these things
that's
coming
another
back.
good thing. Yes, yes, Cheryl is gone just for a day, she said, but hey, that's really neat too. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's great to see, and it's nice to see that we're recovering from COVID, I guess, and life is coming back. Sometimes maybe too slowly, but I
Oh
I
yeah.
I have good news now. I've heard there's a really good book coming up from Maureen Jennings, and
Thank you for encouraging me though, because it's a new concept. It's not new, but it is new. I'm not saying this is not a novel, but all the people that have been in the novels, uh, Canadian people, are going to be telling their story. So, as I said, I'm having a good time with it right now,
I'm happy you're
including,
having a good time, and I'm happy you're very busy.
yes, busy too.
That's
Well,
great. So thank you for taking some time out to celebrate with us, and congratulations once again.
thank you very much, Erik. I was honored. I really was, and surprised, I must say. So.